I'd like to welcome everyone to EOF Implementers Call, number 67, 19th of February, 2025. Um, yeah, so let's go ahead and start with the agenda. Notes are actually at the bottom. So we'll have testing updates, talk about client and compiler updates, and we'll talk about the DevNet is the main feature. I'd like to get DevNet 1 scope nailed down in this call if possible, so we can get this ideally get at least some clients working before Pectra activates in April. And then after we go through the post DevNet 1 changes, we're going to request to add pay to the list of things going um, into the EOF's bucket because of some things that the EOF does with it. Okay, so notes. Yeah, I'm adding in the other screen. So let's start with testing updates. Mario. Well, let's start with EOF DevNet 1. EOF DevNet 1 got it launched last week working with the DevOps team. I got 4 clients on there with 5 different distributions. Marius's version is different from mine. Seems to be holding up just the same. So the only issue is he doesn't have the tracing for the fuzzing yet. Otherwise, I would have just completely pulled mine out of the cycle. We've got mine and Marius's. We got Nethermind, Ref, and Besu ready. As far as the other exit criteria, I think I am 8 hours over the tracing run, the diff run. So now I need to run the transaction fuzzing step of it too, and run that over the next 24 hours. And and then I need to run the ETHs for all of them, which I think I already did before I did the fuzzing, because if they don't pass the ETHs, they won't pass the fuzzing. So I did that for the fuzzing. And I think we could, put a lid on EOF DevNet 1 after this. I think, let me go back to the EOF test plan. Yeah, EOF test. They're staying in sync. We got them staying in sync now. Now after got the fixes published. One of the funny things is the RPC node was published with an older version of Geth with a known bug. They fell out of sync, but still kept serving RPCs and serving up. If you had block hash, serving those up. But after that, if you were to continue using them, they'd be just fine. And yeah, so it looks like we're about to hit the exit criteria for it. We'll talk about Osaka 1 and a little bit further down the discussion. Mario, do you have anything to talk about for East?
So the only thing is this PR. It got merged yesterday. It's the state test generation for container validation tests. So yeah, and basically this allows all of the EOF container validation tests to be deployed as a transaction through an init container in state test and also in live networks. So there was a small issue that when we did container validation for init code containers, we were wrapping into a factory container, but that was fixed, and now we basically just send. So if the container validation test is an init code container validation test, we just send that right away as a transaction data. So yeah, with this we can basically just create tests in live networks and send them to the .NET. I have another idea that we could introduce that is on top of the container validation tests. We can send a transaction to the container that was deployed just in live networks. I mean, just make sure that there's no consistency when the container is run. This can be done automatically, and I think it's fairly simple to add to like DevNet testing. Yeah. Any questions?
So these will show up in the transaction log, the valid and invalid EOF tests, because of the way that we don't validate when we execute the transaction. When we submit the transaction to the pool, we validate the execution. So a bad EOF test will show up in the blockchain and just be a transaction that's really short, right?
Exactly. So now it's basically invalid containers. The transactions should be accepted, but there should be no container that is left in the blockchain. Is that
Okay.
what you were asking or something
Yeah, that's what
different?
I was asking.
All right.
So that way all so that way only one client has to read it and post it. You could just have a network with one client and have everyone sync it, and it should all be the same. It's not like this
Yeah,
is an RPC only test.
exactly. So, I mean, if you want, you can rerun the same tests, the same set of tests with all of the RPCs available, at least one from each client, and you can validate that they can produce blocks with EOF containers in it. That's another option.
Yeah. It should get a chance typically in the rotation though. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
they only
I
have
don't. I don't
success.
think. I don't see that it's completely necessary. I mean, if you like take one RPC at a time for each test, you will get sufficient testing for each RPC. I think.
Yeah. And you can always manipulate like in Kurtosis. I wanted to simulate a network where Nethermind had the lead. So I had to like give them like 4 times as many stake as any of the other nodes. So there's ways to make it work if you need to go around who's doing the generations. Okay.
Yeah, and for the extra transaction that I was mentioning, this is not implemented yet. This is just an idea. So basically, for all valid containers that should deploy a container on the network, it's possible to just send another transaction to the deploy container and see what happens. Not expecting something specifically, but just expecting consensus on the execution. If we say if
Yeah.
we see that as valuable.
Okay. Cool. Um, great. Any other testing updates? Any updates from anyone else related to testing?
Yeah, I wanted to do the tracing changes to my capital, but I got sidetracked by this other Petra thingy that we've been talking about. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah. Tracing, yeah. That what was written for the EVM Go Lab really made tracing super easy. So I'm glad we have it. It's a great tool. Um, name people out. All right, Ben,
Uh,
how about you start? Yeah.
okay, just completed the first review of the branch. Um, just a few minor changes, nothing algorithmic. It's going well.
Okay.
I can
Let's
go.
see who's next. Go ahead.
Yeah, so for us, as Benno already said, I have a different branch than his, and I've been slowly trying to port all of his changes over to that. And yeah, so far it's been holding up well on the DevNet. And so the only thing missing, as I already said, is the tracing. But I want to get that done either today or tomorrow. Yeah, that's it.
All right. Besu, anything, Lewis?
No, so I think the DevNet 0 is running fine, right? I haven't
Yeah, it's
just
running
been
fine.
hearing. Yeah, so on the contract side, on the system contract side, I did just a quick chat with folks here. It's I think on the DevNet, what happened also for previous system contracts, they added them to the Genesis file when they started it off. That might be what we want to do in this case. Not like the one the approach that was done for the block hash history, where you actually need to populate the chain until you enable it. So yeah, I'm not sure if that will be, but I can poke around a bit more.
Okay. Ref. Do we have anyone from Ref on? I'm not seeing anyone from Ref. And we don't have anyone from Ethereum JS or Aragon. Oh, we have Aragon. Aragon 3. Anyone from Medium want to talk about Aragon or Aragon 3? Do they know much? Guess that's a no. I did hear on chat that they have a branch that's getting close, but they don't quite pass all of the EEST tests. And to get into fuzzing, the very first round is the EEST test as the seed. So they won't get very far in fuzzing if they don't pass all of them. So that's what I use as the seed for the fuzzing that I run. And there's no Nimbus. Okay. Compilers, Camille, Solidity.
Okay, so two things on our side. One, we have a branch making use of dapper and swapn to eliminate stack to leap errors finally on EOF. And the other thing is that we're planning a release next week, so that will include that feature and like all the previous work for EOF. That's it.
Okay. So yeah, this will be the pre-release version of EOF because we're looking at doing some changes in the next, some final changes. The last ones we're going to lock down. So we're going to talk about in this meeting.
Yeah, of course. I mean, EOF is basically like experimental feature, like prototype quality.
Right.
But I already let people try to use it and like give us feedback.
Okay, cool. Charlie, we don't have Charlie Viper on. Do we have any other compilers or teams that want to give an update before we go to the main meat of the meeting? All right, hearing none, let's go to the main meat of the meeting. So last week I presented a plan for DevNet 1 that had TX create and the create contract in DevNet 2. The big proposal that I have is to actually move that into DevNet 1. And my reason for that has to do with how things seem to be shaping up in all core devs. There seems to be a desire to ship peer devs the moment it's ready. And so I want EOF to be in a position so that we are also able to ship in that moment when it's ready. And I was looking at the plan, and the only thing that we would really miss if we shipped at DevNet 1 and not DevNet 2 would be TX Create. And the reason there is because we can get rid of the 7698 contract creation transaction, and we're able to keep the contract creation unchanged for legacy and have that be the old legacy path and lock that down so EOF doesn't come in through there. So we can keep a cleaner separation between the two. And so then we would need to also deploy the system contract for the deployment contract for the Soho deployment contract as part of this as well. So my big reason for putting that in there is once we get that shipped, then literally after DevNet 1 and DevNet 2, or if we do a 3 or a 4, we will be able to ship the moment PeerDAS is ready, and the moment PeerDAS is ready to go. And my perspective of this is that this could happen on very short notice. We might be in the middle of a DevNet, and PeerDAS comes into ACD and says, "We're past all the tests. Let's get ready to go." And because the amount of blob use that's coming on the net is going to be valuable enough that they're going to want to drop everything and ship. So with that in mind, my proposal for DevNet 1 is to lock down any breaking changes after DevNet 1. And so we pull everything that might ever need to be a breaking change in here. We could have shipped 0. We were going to ship 0 in prod. But we wanted, we could have, that would have left us with the contract create transaction changes forever. We could have shipped TX create with both of those in place. If I'm moving into DevNet 1, we can leave contract creation alone and let it mean what it's always meant for the future. And there's a few other things that we were going to change. One was the EOF create hashing that we went through over the meetings to reduce it to, it was just the address and the hash. Was that correct? Peter? You're off mute, but your microphone's not working.
The address and the salt.
Yeah. Okay. And then change the stackboard and ext call. Change the data section from OX44 to OXFF. And that's to ensure that the header order matches the body order. Because in future, when we add sections, we're going to add them before the data. The data needs to be at the end. There is a minor spec change in create 2 when they see stuff that starts with EF. The proposal there is to go back to what it was pre-EOF and treat it the same if the create starts with EOF. And return contract, just do a name change on some of the changing elements. That would leave for pure dev for EOF DevNet 1, the metadata section, post 1, 2, metadata sections, TX code address, and TX code type. And these are all strictly additive. We can add these without breaking any backwards compatibility. These are all forward compatible changes. And once we ship DevNet 1, we move into the area where only forward compatible changes happen. So that if you have tooling that produced a contract that was DevNet 1 compatible, it will be compatible going forward. So that also is an important demarcation line for tooling that they can generate it there without having to put the experimental flag on there, that this is what it's going to look like when it gets activated. Any comments on my proposal? Any concerns? Any discussion?
I mean, I agree with it. My main concern was being in the having a backwards incompatible change floating, but that's solved by bringing the transaction create forward. So I'm all for this.
Yeah, I like this separation about like for backwards incompatible changes first, and then have forward compatible whatever. And also, does it look like we will have more resources to work on this? So yeah, I would appreciate if we can pause any of these 3 EAPs mentioned in the DevNet 1, or like post DevNet 1 changes, right? Yeah, I really didn't have any time to look at these, how they look like now.
Okay.
Quick question, is adding metadata section truly backwards compatible?
Yes, it is.
Because it's optional, right?
It's because it's optional, right? So that's the way it would be going forward. Any new header and body sections would have to be optional. You would need to be able to work fine without the header code being in the header. And once the header code's in the header, you can require it in the body. I could imagine there's going to be some changes proposed in the future, possibly used on layer 2s and other places, where it's just a header code. Like maybe they're putting in a marker that says this uses Arbitrum special feature X, and it only works on Arbitrum, and they could do that just fine. Or if can't think of any other header specific features other than you're doing like a minor format change, or you're saying that we disable these opcodes or something. Or you enable certain opcodes. You know, maybe there might be a header that says, actually, we're going to allow all of the legacy opcodes, YOLO, have fun. But that would be something you could do with just a header. So that's why it's backwards compatible. So the philosophy I have on backwards compatibility is you take the entire set of valid contracts If this change results in no contracts being taken out of that set of valid contracts and only add contracts to that set of valid contracts, then it's forward compatible. Powell?
Yeah, so I think what is missing here is this like initial factory contract, right? That will deploy with TX create instruction.
Yeah,
Is it
let
part
me
of the TX create EAP or it's a separate thing?
it's part of the PR right now, but we should call out explicitly.
Yeah. I don't know if did we get any feedback about feasibility of this?
Not
In
on
a
the call,
sense, yeah.
not on ACD last week. Discussion went a different direction. We were asked people to do asynchronous feedback, and I received no such asynchronous feedback as well. So I should probably post another request for asynchronous contract in the ACD thread, in the ACD chat room, and start a thread for it.
Yeah, that's one risk I see. And second is that how much I mean, if what are the chances that it will significantly like pause testing because we don't have it fully figured out? I guess East tests will kind of work still, right? Because we don't really depend on the create transaction very much. But
So execute.
unless it goes to like TA10 tools, I'm not sure, but yeah, probably not. Oh, okay. Yeah, it seems
TA10
like
tools will
this
need an
is
update. Yeah.
quite a step to make, and
So yeah, it sounds like there's two steps: TX create and then to hold contract only. Also we need this includes the init code transaction type. This is the biggest change, I think, more so than TX create support, is the init code transaction type. As Marius pointed out during Pectra, there's a lot of testing that needs to go along with or to go on around this. It's not just something you throw in willy-nilly. So there's going to be some things that need to be looked at. It impacts it, just as you just mentioned, it impacts the tooling. The tooling's going to have to start. Just to test TX create, we'll have to support the transaction type, and that's before we do everything through the creator contract. Oh, I missed one. I was reading off the wrong spec. We'll discuss that when we're done with TX create. Mario.
So what do you mean this will affect EOF test type? I don't think so, right? It doesn't affect the container validation tests, but you're referring that it will affect the state test generated from it or
The
something
state test,
else?
it'll also impact execute remote and execute hide. Because in order to put these onto in the transaction, you would not use the creator contract format anymore. You need to use a new transaction type where you would put these, instead of putting them in the payload, you would put them in the init code, and you would target the whatever address that I think it's going to be A or B, the whatever precompile address that the toehold contract will land. So it would change the type of a create transaction that you would send for execute, and also for tests where we test the creation of the transaction.
I see. But the good thing is that if we make this change so we have this conversion method that converts the EOF container test into status. So I think that should be the only thing that we should change. And on top of that, maybe, so we have also EOF state test format, which basically just creates a state test from a transaction. But those are like very minimal. The amount of tests is not that many. So manually updating those, I don't think that's gonna be a big deal. But I think it should be analyzed anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be able to figure them out if we disable if we do a check for EF code and the create transactions we make. Thanks, Ben. If we see EOF create in the create transactions, we can throw an error in the test. There's also going to be a small smattering of transactions we're explicitly triggering the create transaction, at least in the 7698 tests. We have a few of those being tested. Those were any of the problems we had in the DevNet came out of that transaction because I didn't have them tested very well, and it doesn't really fuzz. It does not fuzz well at all. So that was where we found all of the where both of the bugs prior to DevNet 0 were found. So there are going to be a small amount we'll find.
So what do you guys think if we create a branch on EVM1 that implements TX create, and we just to take a look at how many tests are impacted by this? How hard it will be to modify EVM1 to support this?
EVM1 used to support TX create before, so it's likely not as easy as a revert, but it should not be terribly hard. What do you think, Pavel, Andrei?
Yeah, I mean, we had it, then we moved it to Osaka, then EOF moved to Osaka, so we actually removed that. But yeah, there's code for it in the history, so I think it should be relatively easy to bring it back.
Yeah, I think with this in hand, it would be very easy to check how many of the current test break, and we can better estimate how much of a rework is going to be in the testing side.
Yeah, I still see one issue here, and it's related to this creator contract, because this is like strictly needed to do any testing on DevNet. So it means it has to go probably to the Genesis file of the DevNet. Because we need, unless we implement the fork transition with this, and we don't have any of these so far. So,
I see.
So without the contract, you can't do any IOF on DevNet.
So,
and in case there's an issue with the contract itself, you need to reboot the DevNet.
I see. So yeah, I mean, on the testing side, just putting it in the Genesis is not a big deal, but the bigger deal, I think, is deploying it in mainnet. Because if it's gonna be like a regular state transition, that's a little bit harder to test. But yeah, we can discuss it when we decide the method of deployment. Yep.
Yeah, this transition is, I think, the bigger issue that's going to come up when we discuss it in ACD. There is a world where we still support 7698 and the toehold contract, if that's where it needs to go, if we can't get it figured out before PeerDAS is ready. But I would really like to try and get to a world where we don't have the old 7698 support to kind of deliver on the original vision of how we would do the EOF contracts. How basically we have contract abstraction, go for abstraction while we're at it. Okay. TX create, any other issues, concerns, comments?
So also, if I understand correctly, there's going to be a new transaction type. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because PeerDAS is right now trying to figure out if they need another new transaction type. So there's going to be like need to coordinate which transaction type is going to be used for each feature.
Yeah.
As far as I understand, PeerDAS does not need a new transaction type. They're only changing the format of the proof, so that should be possible in the same transaction type. I think that's the discussion that I have on ACD.
So they're back to no transaction type. They're able to do it in a sidecar.
Yeah.
All right. So I think probably the easiest solution is that we get the first one since we're guaranteed to need one, and PeerDAS can then decide if they need it later. Right now they're in a no. But if they target the one after us, then if they change their mind and go to a yes, they still have room. So that's probably what I'll propose. All right. So one thing I forgot to mention in my list of changes is a change I want to propose in the container size for the container. So right now, we were trying to be consistent in all of our header sizes and have everything either be 2 bytes or a 2-byte length followed by a list of 2-byte items. For containers, I would like to propose a change just for the container number, which is OX3, that it's a 2-byte length followed by a series of 4-byte numbers. My motivation for that is without that, we cannot deploy contracts larger than 64 kilobytes because everything has to come in a container and be created out of the init code. Then we have a limitation on what we can actually deploy on the network. So we'll go from 24K to 64K, which will be great for a while, but I think we need to be in a position where we can have contracts as large as people want, because people are also going to run testnets and layer 2s where they're going to want to go crazy with contract size, despite any risks that are brought up. So by putting it at 4 bytes, that gives us 2 or 4 gigabytes, depending upon whether it's signed or unsigned. And if that's for at least JavaScript and Java, those are at the limits of the arrays. We would have to do different ways to address contract sizes. And for 32-bit Go binaries, in case anyone uses those, they're also limited to that. Go supports 64-bit indexes, Rust supports 64-bit indexes. But for some of the clients, it puts us at the limits of the implementation if we use that number. So I think if we do that number, it's going to be big enough until we see language level changes. What do people think about that?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay.
I think it's kind of you opening the header format again, which I kind of imagine it's like a lot of details you can change and tune there. I thought a bit about it, and I think we kind of assuming that subcontainers will not be like the most frequently used feature, so it probably is fine. I slightly have concerns about this header in a sense because we've added so many kind of exceptions to how you parse it. It kind of the original design is kind of not relevant anymore. In a sense, it tries to have some like generic structure, but like every kind of section has its own quirks already, and maybe just it's not worth to do it this way. And like, I mean, there was a proposal to just make it the simplest possible version of the header to include all the information needed in the most like simple and straightforward way instead of trying to have these sections and this stuff. So I kind of imagine this kind of goes back to this idea.
So do you have an alternative that will get us to larger containers to propose?
No. I mean, what I mean is that we have some kind of sections and the thing, but kind of try to be independent, but you need to know how to parse each separately. Like for example, there's a type section that has to be exactly the size of multiplication of the number of code sections, and so you kind of encode this information twice in the header, and then you need to check if these actually numbers are equal to each other, and this doesn't make so much sense. So the idea was just to put these sizes, what we need, in some simple form, and that's it.
Okay.
So, for example, number of code sections, it's enough to encode the type section and all of the other things. So we need one number, and I don't know if you want to revisit that, but seems we're modifying this already. And this kind of idea, this is somehow generic, I think doesn't hold so much. Unless this is strictly needed for this optional section. So
That reminds me of another one we missed, extra stacking types.
yeah, but it might be enough to go to the implementation and try to implement this and see like how many changes you actually need to do. And it probably affects this like this generic piece of code that tries to loop over the section IDs and see what's there. So we
Okay.
can try to prototype that and see what is actually the difference in the implementation.
Okay. So EVM1 will do a prototype and report back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And the one thing I put in there that I mentioned that we forgot is also changing the types. There was a proposal. Don't know why I didn't list that. Did we drop it that we weren't going to change extra height instead of total height? Or did I just forget it?
No, we want to do it.
Still on the list, yes.
Okay. All right. So that's just another generation of validation change. That shouldn't be too bad. That'll involve some changes to the everyone's client, including East code generation, but it should be fairly simple. It changes from a validation to a generation rule. Okay. Cool. Any other last call for changes to version 1 to the release version? Because I think after we ship DevNet 1, it's going to take something on the order of a security issue like we had a Constantinople to change anything.
I have a question. The point alter EOF create hashing to just be address plus salt. I think this should go together with the TX create change, which already uses that scheme. So in a sense, we don't want them to go separately. I'm not
Sorry,
sure.
I wasn't there. What's the benefit of the of just using address and salt?
It's the most flexible one. It just puts the responsibility of including the right salt in on the application layer.
But
it was argued in a thread.
But this also means that we cannot do counterfactual addresses contracts anymore, right? Or...
No, we can, because we can have a factor which includes the whatever it needs to include into the salt.
Okay.
So it can be, not trusted, but you can be sure that if a factory which is included in the address includes the init code hash, for example, in its in the salt, then it can be counterfactual then.
Okay.
There's a big discussion thread on GitHub, which actually led us to bring TXCreate back, because without it, counterfactual deployments would be very hard.
Cool.
And we can also deploy, there's an ERC I'm going to start pushing after DevNet 1 ships, where we can have a standard set of crate contracts that will provide all features that people depended on before. Like people are going to want saltless deploys, basically have a namespace deploy. So we create a standard ERC-based contract, and they can include that as a library and get their namespace deployments where they can deploy the same contract over and over to a new address. Same thing if you want to include the address in your contract. I think those are the two, not the address, the init code. If you want to include other hashes in there, so those things that people might lose, they would just need to write a smart contract around it, and we create a standard smart contract for those things they lose if they just want to come in and use them normally. And because of what's most exciting for me about this is because we can use the init code transaction, we don't have to rely on Nick's method anymore. We can mine down the salt with the contract number, and anyone can deploy it on any chain without having to sink money, unrecoverable money into the contracts that we deploy. So that's for me personally, that's exciting. But okay. Anything for DevNet 1 before we move on to post DevNet 1?
Okay, so back to my question. EOF create is gonna the EOF create change is gonna go together with the TX create inclusion, right?
Yes.
That's what the plan says.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's TX create, remove 7698, EOF hashing changes, EOF create stack order, data section number, create two behavior to be stored to Pectra level, rename return contract return code, extra stack height in the code section, and container size becomes 4 bytes.
Yes,
I mean that
the EOF create, the first point is highest priority, and we should make sure that it goes together in TX create.
Yes.
More so than the next points, which are just quality of life improvements.
Right. So I think these are roughly, well, I would put code a little higher.
Okay, thanks. That was just something I want to make clear.
What are the requirements for something like the creator contract? Like, it's not going to have to be audited. What is the process that this kind of thing usually goes through?
We should get an audit. Yes, that is something we will need.
Is that a problem in terms of the timeline?
I don't know. I will bring that up with Tim, and he knows he can get us the detail on that. It should be a simple one, but what's going to be tricky is the people auditing it are going to have to get their headspace inside of EOF and what we're doing with the hash changes. And even with the hash changes, I think getting an audit lesson on it would be fine too. We're probably going to have to spend some time back and forth saying, no, that's exactly how it's supposed to happen. But yes, we should get an audit. That is, I'm writing a sticky note. I'm going to talk to Tim after this meeting.
Yes, and I think this should be like I don't know, I want to say like an audit that also takes into account whether the contract that we have written down allows for all the features that we are expecting it to deliver. So all the modes of the deployments and all all the factories that we're gonna create from out of this first contract, that they will that you'll be able to control the addresses as you wish.
Yes.
Because right now, we are expecting all the features like the contrafactual, deterministic, cross-chain, whatnot, to be supported by what we have designed, but we should have someone external validate all these claims.
And it's important to note that in the initial toehold contract that's going in for everyone, the init code reference from the init code transaction is part of it. So we already changed the salt from what is provided in. So that's, but that wouldn't stop people from deploying a TX create that doesn't have that requirement. We'll probably want the auditors to consider that. Okay, that's a good find. I'll definitely talk to him about that. DevNet 1, anything else? Sure, we'll think of something.
So just a final comment on the previous thing. Should we consider this contract finalized?
In 2 weeks, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we need to finalize it. The notion that we needed to finalize for audit today is kind of a surprise. So let's consider it finalized in 2 weeks, or if there's going to be notice it's going to change, we'll know in 2 weeks. And I would think anything that would change from that would strictly come from audit findings at that point after 2 weeks.
Do we know any specific changes that we're going to have to do? Like anything in DevNet 1 here will result in changes?
No, but I don't think anybody's thought deeply about it yet. So that's why I want to give the 2 weeks. I'm not anticipating any changes, but we need to give people at least a couple of days to wake up in the middle of the night and say, I forgot about that.
Okay, so we should like think about this. Now is the
Yes.
moment to think deeply about this and make sure it's
Yes.
where we want it to be.
Yes. Last call for creator contract. Okay. Cool. So post DevNet 1 changes, we'll discuss these when we get there. What currently is on the list is metadata, TX code address, and TX code type. If period is not super early, I think we'll have time to get into this. There was a request that came in on the chat room yesterday, noting something about the way the payout code works. So what you could do in Legacy is you could zero gas your calls and guarantee that it'll serve as a pay or it will revert, which for some people, they consider that a safety issue to be able to pay someone. So the solution that was proposed by WJ Elements, longtime contributor to the forums, was to bring the payout code back. And that is an existing, there's an existing proposal for it. People have been pushing it for a while. And this solves the problem in EOF because you can say, I just want to pay, I don't want to call. So that's something to add to the backlog, but where it sits, whether it's in Osaka or Amsterdam or later, is a game we play outside of the discussion of it going in. So any thoughts on this? Franjo, you're off mute. Nope, no comments. So let's think about this one for 2 weeks. Where it lands, I think is an issue secondary to getting DevNet 1 in place. People may come in and advocate for it to be in Osaka. Some people may advocate for it to be in Amsterdam for scope. My initial guess is coming out of ACD is it's going to be immediately pushed to Amsterdam because we're trying to limit the scope of Prague and anything that hasn't already been pitched, but it's still open. So it could go either way. This one could show up in the Prague and Amsterdam discussions. Anything else anyone wants to discuss while we're here?
When is Daniel, when is roughly your point of view when we will be jumping off DevNet 0 to DevNet 1? Roughly.
So I think we're at DevNet 0 now. I don't anticipate any changes. I think we can lock in the versions that work. I would like to launch DevNet 1 the moment we have 3 clients that are interoperating fine. I would really like that to be in the middle of April, but I realize that people got some busy things coming up in March. Probably about a week or 2 per client of work, but then there's the testing that needs to pipeline around it. So it might not be available for a month until we do it. But I would really like to when is Osaka active? When is not Osaka? When does Pectra activate? I'd like it as close to that as possible. Upgrade date. April 8th. Yeah. Sometime in April, early April would be preferable, but late April is fine. I basically want to be in a position that once we start going into the post Pectra that we have something that we can ship in the event that PeerDash says, actually, we're done, let's go. So that's my hopes. And DevNet 2 and later, we can take a more leisurely pace. So it's going to be heads down starting in March, I think, once we get the feedback from the EOF, from the EVM1 exploratory work. All right. Any other requests? If not, I'd like to thank everyone for the time they spent on this call or for the time they spent working on EOF. It's been great. We have the summit is in sight. Thank you very much. Talk to you in 2 weeks.